Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I'm going to be doing a quick review of the Empty Throne duology by Daniel Polanski. This is a series that I've mentioned briefly on my channel a few times now. My Patreons and I buddy read this over the course of 2 months. Actually, many of them didn't even bother picking up book 2 because I think they were pretty jaded after the experience of book 1. I'll go on to that more a little bit later on. But this is a series that I would say I had fairly, not necessarily high expectations, but I had some expectation going into it because every other book that I've read of Polanski's I've loved, and I think he's an absolutely fantastic writer. This is one of his older duologies, and unfortunately, this duology didn't really work for any of us. I'm not going to bother going into a summary. I think the only thing I will mention as it relates to the plot is this is a society that is very much based on hierarchy. So we have a lot of imbalance. We very much have the people at the top, and we also have the people at the bottom. And there's a lot of kind of strife for the people at the bottom, and they're starting to get very fed up with the people at the top. So kind of like revolution brewing, there's a lot of dissatisfaction with the political system, and people are starting to push back. So that's the kind of setting, that's the kind of backdrop of what to expect. And whilst this is a duology, this is very much one book. And I do wonder whether this was initially meant to be one book and the publishers decided to split it in half. I kind of wish they hadn't, because I think that plays into the disjointed nature of the duology. So let's actually just move into what I did like. What I did like was very much in the minority, unfortunately. And I think one thing that I quite liked was the politics. There's quite a political duology in the fact that there are lots of people trying to maneuver themselves into positions of power, and we're seeing that happen in real time. We're also seeing people stab each other in the back. We're seeing people change sides quite often, and we don't really know when that's coming, which I think was done quite well. That was the only thing that I genuinely think was quite solid. There was one character that I also quite enjoyed. One of our POVs, because this is a multi-POV story, was quite intriguing. She's a female character who is very much at the top of society, and she is kind of moving quite a lot of the chess pieces on the board, and I love that character type, and where it's regardless of gender, and I do think she was quite well realized. The issue with her character though is that I did not like the ending of her character, because even though while I understood why the author did her character in that way, like why he wrote her in that way, I think it was very much expected, and I would have liked to have been a bit surprised, to be honest. But now let's move on to what I didn't like, because there were quite a lot of things that I didn't like, and I think some of these things were echoed by my patrons as well. So the first thing is that this is an incredibly slow series. There is a lot of people talking and not really doing. There's a lot of people giving their opinion on things, but they're not actually like adding anything of real value. I don't mind that generally. Like, I like a political series that is a lot of people talking. I don't mind that. Some of my favorite series are quite like that. I don't need a ton of action, but it was so boring. It was just really boring and slow, and it felt like things took so long to pick up, and when they did pick up, they happened really quickly, and then it was slow again, and it just didn't really make sense. So the pacing was really off. You're expecting some element of build-up by the end of the second book, and while we get it, the build-up isn't worth it. Like, it feels like we've been building up to something huge, and then it just doesn't really realise into anything that interesting. So the ending was a huge letdown. The middle part and the beginning part were also a huge letdown. So overall, the experience just felt quite flat. Even though I enjoyed aspects of book 1, like I think I gave it a 3 or a 3.25, which isn't bad by any means. But the second book I gave like 2.5, 2.75, which is not great in my opinion. And I've never done that to a Polanski book either. Like, this is my lowest rated series for Polanski. And I just think it needed more. Like, it needed something more. It needed probably less characters, and it needed much more focus, because we were lacking that, and it really showed. The plot was also like non-existent. Now, I don't mind that in general, like if it's a very character-driven story, but that assumes that the characters are actually interesting, and I just didn't find a lot of these characters interesting. Then because of that, the plot really suffered as a result, because there is no real plot. And again, I don't mind that in general, but there then mean your characters are interesting and they can carry the story. But these characters couldn't carry the story, even though there was no real story to tell, right? The characters, I think there's like 4 or 5 POVs that we follow, and they all fit a very specific character type in fantasy. So we have like the veteran soldier who's kind of done with life. We have the strong, politically savvy woman who's kind of moving all the chess pieces. We have the guy who is at the bottom of the totem pole who wants to fight in the revolution and wants to lead the revolution. We have the super evil guy who's trying to quash the revolution. Like, they're all character types that we know. And while I don't necessarily need to have a new character type every single book that I read, I do need those character types to be interesting, and I need them to be well realised. And unfortunately, they just weren't, apart from that one character that I mentioned earlier, who was. They all just felt like caricatures. They all felt like characters that I've read multiple times before. Nothing was added. Nothing felt fresh or new. And I think that's quite disappointing, because I found Polanski has used similar character types in the past, but there's always been something new, something kind of different about them, and that was just not the case in this series, unfortunately. The other thing about the characters is that they're all a bit bland. They all just kind of moan, and again, apart from that one character, they're all just kind of, they all just felt a bit one-dimensional, which is honestly quite shocking for me to say about a Polanski book, because, you know, as an example, his novella, I've forgotten the name of it, I'll put it up on the screen. So good. It's so short. We follow 5 different characters, and yet they all felt so fleshed out. They all felt so interesting. And yet in this duology, none of that. Very disappointing. Thematically as well, and I think this will probably be my last point, the fact that it all felt very surface level. So as I mentioned, you know, this book is about like oppression and revolution, and about what happens when you oppress a population so severely, and the outcomes of that, right? And I just felt like we didn't really see that come to fruition. We didn't really get like an interesting take on it. Again, it doesn't need to be new all the time, but I would like to see like the point. And I don't think I really saw the point of this book. And maybe that was the point, in which case fair enough. But even like a lot of KJ Parker's books, where the characters do things that are like just straight up bad and don't really have a point, like you still kind of see the point, right? But here I just felt like these people were doing things that didn't really make sense. And I think that is partially because the thematic work wasn't explored that well, or wasn't as central as maybe it should have been. I love conversations around like oppression and what happens when you push a people to their limit. Naturally, things are going to hit an inflection point, and things are probably not going to go that well for the people at the top. And perhaps rightly so. So I think maybe it would have been good to have had another POV of somebody at the bottom of the totem pole, just so that we could have an alternative view of what it's like to live in that sort of society. Because the majority of the POVs were people who were like at the middle or at the top of the totem pole. And I just think, while that is interesting, and I did like the fact that he provided this 360 view, I think we needed another POV at the bottom to balance it out, and we just did not have that. So overall, this series was a letdown. I think overall I'd rate this series like maybe like a 2.75, which again isn't like the worst series I've ever read. It's like very average. But I think for a Polanski series to be average, you know, I never thought I would say that, to be honest. Again, this is one of his earlier series, so maybe this was while he was kind of finding his feet. I do think it really needed a bit more editing. I think it needed a bit more focus. I think 2 or 3 POVs would have been better than 4 or 5 POVs. I think it would have actually helped the series to have a bit less politics. I can't believe I'm saying that, because politics is one of my favourite things to read. But it kind of became a victim of its own politics, if that makes sense. And it really did not help the overarching story develop in the way that I think it probably should have. So overall, not the best experience. Overall, I personally probably wouldn't recommend this series to anybody, even though I do recommend other books by this author. I think the idea of it, great. The execution of it, not so great. And I'm definitely obviously going to read more by this author, probably Lowtown next, but it won't be for a while. And yeah, I need to just get rid of this series out of my head, because it really was not that great. Let me know down below if you have read this series. Aside from my Patreons, I haven't actually spoken to anybody who has read it. So I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on how this series panned out, especially kind of your thoughts on the characters. And then also, you you know, whether you were actually engaged the entire way through, because I just found my attention waning quite a lot as well. So let me know down below, and yeah, I'm quite interested to hear people's thoughts, because like I said, I haven't spoken to anybody about it and I'm quite curious. Thanks for watching, folks. As always, stay safe, take care, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.